the more pressing thing for Anglo-Catholics who take the traditional view is survival.
Say more?
Well, there is one thing about providing a place where people can exist. The church is not about existing, it's about evangelizing and growing.
Mm.
And if some sort of space is not created in which this particular view, which is proclaimed to be an equally valid view, cannot grow and flourish, by that I mean being able to sponsor people for ministry, lay ministry, and ordained ministry. If what seems to be happening, if it becomes more and more difficult for ordinands within this particular to get through systems, or to be just grudgingly accepted, then how can it grow and flourish? The church needs leadership.
Mm.
It's nigh on impossible for a person who takes a traditional view to be a diocesan bishop, and although no one says it, everyone knows that that's the case. I know myself that's the case. So if there's no room for that tradition to flourish, then what will do? It will die. It will die. And not simply ordination candidates. You know, the centurion says to Jesus, I understand your authority. I say to someone, go here, go there, and there, according to need.
Mm.
And a bishop is a leader in mission. If all a traditionalist bishop is allowed to be in the system, is a sort of pastor to existing congregations, and there's no authority over mission, and the changes that need to happen institutionally in order to engage with the culture, then how can it grow? And in some ways, I probably disagree with some of my traditionalist brothers and sisters on this, because they're more intent on, and quite rightly,
preservation,
on the
maybe,
preservation, and also of the sacramental assurance and all those things which are important. But that is not enough for me.
No.
We need a space in which to flourish and grow. And an institution, that an institution has the power to, even without speaking, diminish people.
Mm.
And I think, and I say this with respect, the traditionalist movement has been diminished by the church. That was a sign.
You get used to that, I suppose.
And by that I mean, I'm not a political animal, I've always been criticised a bit for being too irenic.
Mm.
And, I love every bit of the church. Equal love, says Augustine of Hippo.
Mm.
Love the church equally. And one seeks to do that. But I've just watched parishes and priests of the traditional integrity being ground down by people in authority in the church, not able to get jobs, not feeling equally loved. Then they get grumpy and then get criticised for being grumpy.
Mm.
And there's no equal love in the church. And that needs to be named. And it's uncomfortable to name it. I'm not saying anything to you I haven't said in the College of Bishops.
Mm. Mm.
Needs to be named. Now that's the bells for sprinkling, so that's going to go on for the next 5 minutes. And I'm sounding severe, but it does need to be a name. Yeah. People need to be honest. And I say with respect to the English, they're not very good at being honest.
Mm.
And I think it's more to do with their self-image than it is to do with pastoral concern. Little by little, there's a squeezing out. And I see no evidence that there is a heart within the hierarchy of the church, and that I include, and particularly the General Synod, that is the political activists in the life of the church, to make a flourishing space.
We were talking a little bit yesterday about a kind of paradox of Archbishop Rowan's handling of the sort of sexual ethics questions facing the communion and the ordination of women. On the one hand, he said innovating in terms of ordaining gay people or blessing same-sex relationships is out.
Ordaining, practicing gay people.
Yeah, because it's discontinuous with the tradition. And yet the ordination of women is discontinuous with the tradition, but that's okay.
Yes. I suppose there would be questions about significance. I don't see myself how one comes to the conclusion. How do you come to the conclusion that something is significant? Do you decide for yourself, Does a denomination decide for itself, or do you submit to what the wider Catholic fellowship says is significant? We can so easily talk about the Church of England as if it's the Church. It is not. And if the Roman Catholic Church has been arrogant in making a claim to be the Church, it's got more reason to do so than we have. So the question is, how do we determine whether something is of significance or not? So significant that it would affect us all. And I don't think we have the capacity to decide whether this is significant. The rest of the Church is saying this is so significant, you shouldn't do it. And we are deciding not to listen. Though on the question of homosexuality, we've decided to listen, or the Archbishop has decided to listen. And probably the Church at large. You know, I find a sort of confusion in that, in terms of process. But Archbishop Brown's got a bigger brain than I have, and he probably doesn't see the confusion, but I see the confusion there. It seems to me... I mean, I have to say, it was the same confusion that was there in Archbishop George Carey, who basically said to the Synod, whatever the scriptures say that is ambiguous, the tradition is not ambiguous. However, evangelism in this context requires the ordination of women. Well, you could equally say, or one could equally say, blessing of same-sex relationships requires this change in Brighton, where I used to live and minister. So, you know, I think that there's an inconsistency there. And it's probably the fruit of the fact that as a church, we're not sure where to look for our decision-making. What criteria?
Yes, that's true. I suppose, I mean, I was very keen to, you know, to dedicate this pilgrimage to God and to keep focused on things that matter. And that has, not that these things don't matter, but I didn't want to be overtaken by politics. I realised as soon as I was going to put stuff on the internet that people were going to start getting upset quite quickly. So I've spoken to somebody who's a strong advocate of women bishops, I spoke to Bishop Martin, I've spoken to you. Inevitably, I've had to sort of re-engage with it and sort of nuance my own position a bit. And I think the idea that helps me hold it all together from my own integrity is, it comes from actually what Bishop Martin said in his interview about it being the nature of Christianity and the Church in general, not just of the Roman Catholic Church or a particular denomination or whatever, that the Church is always holding together continuity with the tradition and faithfulness to that, with the need to experiment, engage with the culture and innovate. And those two things are always important. They're always held in tension. And I think...
well, that's the question for our church. Is it going to hold them in tension and allow both to flourish?
Quite.
That is the question.
That's the position I've ended up with. I mean, this is more sort of detailed conversation than I've ever had with a traditionalist priest before. And I think my view is the ordination of women is an innovation. Seems to me a good one. But because it's an innovation, it must be possible for there to be dissent. And as you say, that doesn't mean that dissenters are sort of grudgingly tolerated and put in a sort of hermetically sealed compartment somewhere, and we wait for them to suffocate. You know, actually, this must be embraced and celebrated and given scope.
And the sacrifices made for that to happen.
Yeah.
The sacrifices made on all sides for that, for that to happen. I wouldn't see it as politics. You know, a synod is not a political body. It's a body of Christian believers who at heart want to do God's will, and together trying to seek what that will might be. So actually, I could put it another way and say, one of the things that inevitably comes onto the heart of the prayerful person is the disunity of the church, division within the life of the church. When is that division inevitable for the sake of truth? Whenever there is division, it needs to be with tears and with regret. So it's not primarily a political question. It's why I myself, I'm not a member of the Synod. I wasn't elected when I ran for it. Probably just as well. Probably bring out the worst in me. You see, I can't divvy up and say, I mean, if I thought the ordination of women was what God wanted, I'd go for it. I'm just unsure about it. So I can't sort of divide up like, we'll have a sort of. I have to say, I don't believe it's what God wants. I can't. I'm not so I say, well, if it's true for you, then it's true, and this is true for me, then this is true for me. Then either God wants it or He doesn't.
I don't think that sort of hotline to God exists within the church in such a sure way that people can make truth claims on that basis. Actually, what's happening in the church all the time is that people are experimenting and finding different ways of being faithful to the gospel, and sometimes there is more than one way, and time will tell. There are all sorts of sort of maybe issues of a sort of lesser order where the Anglican way over 400 years has been divergent with that of the Roman Catholic Church, and things have a funny way of working out. It seems to me that as Anglicans, at our best, we cluster around the scriptures and the Catholic creeds, the sacraments, the orders of ministry, and then the whole thing is pretty unruly beyond that.